and you're welcome to drop questions in the Q&A section below at any time, but please keep them clear, respectful, and specific. And we'd first like to do brief introductions for the folks that are going to be speaking, asking questions tonight. So let me go with, pass it off to Chase first.
Thanks, John. Hey, everyone. I'm Chase Cottarelli. I'm a sophomore at Columbia University, and I'm the events director for the Political Union.
Hi, everyone. My name is Billy Harrison, and I'm a junior at Fordham University. I'm currently the president and the co-founder of the Political Union at Fordham University.
Hi.
Hey, everybody. My name is Felix Balin. I am a second year at Northwestern University, and I serve as co-president of the Northwestern University Political Union.
And my name is Conrad Mojica. I'm a third year at the University of Chicago and co-president of UChicago's Political Union.
Great. All right, so our guest tonight is certainly a rather difficult person to introduce. Professor Chomsky is the author of more than 150 books on warfare, language, political theory, and the mass media. And he's been at the forefront of the American public sphere since the 1960s. He's also widely recognized as the father of modern linguistics. He's also a major figure in analytical philosophy and cognitive science. He's a prominent activist, having supported American military involvement in Vietnam, opposed American military involvement in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and supported the global Occupy movement, labor rights, and pluralistic access to free speech in the media for decades. He's also been on CIA watch lists. He's been on President Richard Nixon's master list of political opponents and on the London Times short list of makers of the 20th century. He's the recipient of numerous awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, the U.S. Peace Prize from the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation, and the Sydney Peace Prize. And he's also the namesake of a species of bee and a species of frog. Professor Noam Chomsky, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleased to be with you.
That's great. And I'll turn it over to Chase now for our first question.
Thank you, John. And thank you so much, Professor. I'm really looking forward to tonight. I super appreciate you taking the time to speak with all of us. We have a huge audience right now. So
Thank you.
Yeah, to kick off our questions, today marks the first 100 days of the Biden administration. So we want to touch on some of the few of the administration's major policies. The United States and other Western countries have been buying up surplus doses of COVID vaccines, which could be disseminated elsewhere, particularly in developing countries. This Monday, however, the Biden administration announced it would send 60 million AstraZeneca vaccine doses abroad. As we acquire more doses here of current vaccines and potential booster shots, how should we decide what to do with them, and how significant of an effect might this have on American soft power if we give them away?
Well, that's a very interesting topic, not just about the United States, but about all the wealthy countries. So if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, President Biden did release some of the AstraZeneca vaccines to other countries. The US has a store of them that it can't use. The FDA has not yet approved them, so they're just stored away. Who did he give them to? Canada, which has the world's record in storing vaccines beyond what it can use, and Mexico as part of a bribe to keep people fleeing from Central American wreckage, for which we are largely responsible, to keep them from fleeing to the United States. Well, that was the first move. Now he's announced that they're providing supplies of some kind to India, which is in the face of a devastating catastrophe, and some others. Actually, this is a bit better than the European countries are doing. Most of the European countries are monopolizing vaccines for themselves. This is not only unethical beyond any words that I can think of, but it's also suicidal, and they know it. It's a very interesting case where the rich countries are making decisions that they know will harm them in order for basically two reasons. One, greed, and the other to protect the exorbitant patent rights of the huge pharmaceutical corporations that are granted to them by the mislabeled free trade agreements. They know perfectly well, everyone does, that unless Africa and Asia, poor countries in Latin America, have access to vaccines quickly, the virus will mutate. It's already happening. Apparently, there's a new variant in India already. Some of them will be very likely lethal, like Ebola. Some may be worse. It'll come back and harm the wealthy countries. But nevertheless, even to preserve themselves, they have to keep to the principles of both greed and protection of the tremendous profits of a big pharma. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. It says something about our culture and our moral and intellectual culture.
Hi, Professor Chomsky. I'd like to ask you about perhaps a different area of American foreign policy, and that is Afghanistan. So the United States is set to exit from Afghanistan by September 11th of this year, 20 years after the tragic events which sparked the invasion on that same date in 2001, which is actually longer than some of the lifetimes of many of those in attendance today. So I was wondering, would you please reflect on the legacy of the longest war in American history? Do you agree with Biden's course of action? And additionally, many Republicans and some Democrats, as expected, are upset with this decision, as many argue that it will strengthen the Taliban. How would you respond to this critique?
Well, actually, the longest war in American history started in 1783. One of the major reasons for the American Revolution was a royal proclamation of King George III in 1763, which prevented the colonists from moving westward into the territory of the Indian nations. They were constrained to staying east of the Appalachians. The colonists weren't having that. Certainly, major land speculators like George Washington didn't want that. So as soon as the country succeeded in freeing itself from British rule, began the wars of aggression against the Indian nations. To take the terms that were used by the founding fathers themselves, the great figures of American history, began the wars against that hapless race of Native Americans, which we are exterminating with such merciless perfidy and violence. That's John Quincy Adams, the intellectual author of Manifest Destiny, long after his own contribution to this process was made and before the major genocidal operations which were in the far west in California. So that war went on until the end of the 19th century. It's over 100 years. There have been others. The war after 2011, we should take a look back at it. We should ask ourselves, why did the United States invade Afghanistan? It's a good question. The Afghans were asking right at the time. In fact, they met the leading Afghan militants who were fighting against the Taliban were bitterly opposed to the US invasion. Now, you can't read about it here, but you can read about it even in the British press or elsewhere. The leading figure in the anti-Taliban resistance, Abdul Haq, who was later killed, highly respected, wrote something which actually appeared in the British press in which he condemned the Americans for wanting to just terrify the world and use their muscle and not caring at all about the fate of the Afghans, who would be seriously harmed by the then planned invasion. He also said that they're harming, this invasion will harm our efforts to overthrow the Taliban from within, which they were then in the process of doing. 1,000 elders, Afghan elders, had a convocation in Peshawar, across the border, in which they also harshly condemned the invasion for similar reasons. So why did we invade? Was it just to show our muscle and terrify the world, or was it in order to get rid of Al-Qaeda? It's hard to believe. A small police operation could have gotten rid of Al-Qaeda, which was a small group in the northwest area, AfPak on the border, probably with the cooperation of the Taliban, who were very eager to get rid of them. They were a thorn in their side. Taliban actually made some offers to extradite Al-Qaeda to some Muslim state where they could be tried. And these offers may or may not have been serious. We don't know, since the Bush administration simply dismissed them, just wanted to invade. Okay, invaded, had a major effect on Al-Qaeda. At that time, it was a tiny group stuck in a small sector of AfPak, Afghan-Pakistan border. Now, thanks to the invasion, it's all over the world, spread everywhere. It's a great achievement. Meanwhile, we've continued the war in Afghanistan. We're now in a position where it's very difficult to find a solution that is that takes into account the needs of the Afghans. If you look at the discussion here, it's almost 100% concerned with what it means for us. Are we wasting too much money? Are Americans being killed? Should we pull out of this longest war? What about the Afghans? Do they have something to say about it? Well, actually, they takes us into interesting areas. I should say that the current proposals are not to end the war. Their proposals are to remove American ground troops, which is part of a general shift in war making that has been taking place since the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, if you look back, the US military made a very serious mistake. You can't send draftees, college students who you take off the streets. You can't send them to fight a colonial war. Colonial wars are vicious, brutal, murderous, and they're just not ready for it. So what happened by the late 60s was the Army was beginning to fall apart, to its credit, I should say. Soldiers didn't want to fight. They were getting high on drugs. You had incidents of fragging officers, attacking officers. Basically, the Army wanted them out because the Army was in fact collapsing. Other imperial powers long ago understood this. The British and the French didn't send draftees. The French used the Foreign Legion, professional killers. The British used Gurkhas, sepoys. The officers were British, but you didn't take civilians off the street and think they could fight a colonial war. And since that time, the American military has shifted tactics. By now, it largely uses mercenaries. They're not called mercenaries, they're called contractors, but it's the same thing. Basically, South African killers, others, they can be the people doing the work on the ground with special forces, trained special forces, but only less and less the actual army, which is just not up to this kind of activity. They can fight major wars like